Oh, oh, sorry, I didn't give you permission to share your screen. Go ahead. Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our CAWASA Wednesday webinar. And this is webinar number 20 of 2025. And unfortunately, this is going to be the last one for the rest of the year. And hopefully, we should resume in January 26th. So, welcome to you, Dr. Jo Burgess, and over to you. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. Again, the last time I met everybody, I was talking on a similar topic. So some of you, if you were in the last one I did, which was, oh, I can't remember. We're older than I thought, but a long time ago anyway. You'll see some familiar names and concepts on the screen, but I have some nice updates. So I will get stuck in. The title for today is De-risk and accelerate, breaking the cycle of trial, trial, and trial again. And what we're looking for, or what we're working towards, is a different kind of future. The way that lots of us manage water now isn't great for a changing climate. And we have different weather patterns, we have pollutants we've never had to face before. We've got rising industrial demand for water in the large population centres. And at the same time, public expectations and regulatory expectations around environmental performance is growing. So we're looking to make a water environmental transition, which is a shift in how we manage and value and interact with water. A lot of utilities now, you guys included, I'm sure, are looking for ways to prioritize environmental sustainability, to be more resilient in the face of all sorts of different challenges, and look for equitable access to water. But we still have to recognize that there are social and economic factors that shape the way water is used and treated and distributed. And that means trying to move away from extractive systems and polluting systems and move towards regenerative, circular water practices that support ecosystems and communities. Now, that all sounds lovely, doesn't it? But it is really hard to do. And carrying on working the way we always have will mean that we get the results we've always got. So we're going to have to do something different. The good news, though, is that we're not short of proven emerging best practices and technologies that actually can achieve the water environmental transition. And here I'm not talking about unproven experimental technologies. I'm talking about things that are established. They are at tech readiness level 9 or 8, so we know they work. They've been tested and proven to be successful in operational environments once or twice already. They just need to become mainstream. Now, I say that like it's easy, and we all know it isn't. Lots of technologies get stuck in what we call the piloting valley of death. It takes between 4 and 17 years to move an emerging technology from experimental, from R&D, into being common practice. That is a really long time. It's comparable to other industries like healthcare and oil and gas, for example. But what that means is that because of this really long sales cycle in the water industry and those other kinds of sectors, nearly 90% of water-related technology startups fail to make the move from sort of R&D, academic, grant-funded systems into stable commercial enterprises. And it's not normally because the technology isn't good. On the right-hand side of the screen, you can see the results of a post-mortem or a set of post-mortems on 110 different startup companies between 2018 and 2021, predominantly in the water industry, but not solely in the water industry. And what you can see from this graph is that there is very rarely one reason for a startup's failure. The postmortems identified the top 10 reasons startups fail, and most of them offered multiple reasons for their failure, so that you can see if you add up the numbers 38, 35, 20, and so on, these numbers don't add up to 100%, they exceed it. But what I want you to notice is that a poor product only featured in 8% of the failures, so second from the bottom. So it's not because emerging technologies are bad, it's because the technology providers run out of money, often because they can't secure enough customers or there's no market pull for these good technologies soon enough. And this is what drops us all into the piloting valley of death. This chart shows you the numbers of technology trials and pilots that took place in different areas of the world between 2020 and 2024. So you can see the different regions. They're divided up continentally, 150 in Africa, 400 in Europe, 350 in Asia Pac. So it's not because utilities aren't trying new things, it's because they're not using them. 75%, so that grey bar shows you that 75% of these pilot projects didn't move into implementation at the end of the trial. For all sorts of reasons, why not? And this is what they are. So I'm not going to dwell a long time on the barriers. I think everybody in the webinar is really familiar with what they are. We have technical barriers where the technology that's on offer doesn't solve an existing problem. Somebody comes to bang on your door and says they've got the best new thing and it's the greatest thing ever and you should definitely buy it. And if you ask them what it does, they list a whole fruit salad of different applications because they're trying to sell it to everybody all of the time for everything, and it's not the right solution for the problem you actually have. Or they can't articulate the value proposition. So it's impossible to get support from the budget holders in your organization because the technology provider cannot articulate what it will do for you, and therefore you cannot articulate what the technology will do for you if you need to sell it upwards in your organization. And that just leads to leadership not being particularly interested in the things that you have to offer, and for good reason. It doesn't work well if you try something different, but you're using a traditional project management approach because you can't guarantee when you're trying something for the first time in your own asset base that it will hit its targets at a particular time. And it's very difficult to introduce things if you try them at one site or somebody else tries them and you try to convince people at other sites or in other organizations that this worked here and therefore it's going to work everywhere else. It's not always the case. So you get this kind of organizational immune response, I like to call it, where people look at something, even if you know it works, and they'll go, oh, no, that's not from here. So they're just not that interested. There are ways to overcome all of these barriers, and a lot of them place the onus for articulating the value proposition, for explaining what the business case is. All of that responsibility falls largely on the technology developer or the technology vendor, but they have to work with you to understand what your use case is and what the problem is that you're trying to solve. So there are ways of overcoming all of these issues, and mostly through really good communication and a collaborative approach. You can vet the user's organizational KPIs. So there's no point trying to sell an amazing technology that will lower the phosphorus in treated sewage down to 0.1 milligrams per litre. If that's not the target that the utility needs to achieve, then it's not addressing the right problem. And in that case, the user and the tech provider have to talk together about what the problem actually is and be not brutally honest, but be candid about what the technology can do and what's actually required. And if there's a mismatch, then it's just the wrong tech for a situation. Once you've identified that it is the right technology and you know what the value proposition is and you know what the business case is, so it could be we will change from technology A to technology B. It will enable us to lower our phosphorus limits below the compliance level that we're required to achieve. Then you can articulate the business case and go, and it's not going to cost us any more than our incumbent technology is costing us to run at the moment, but then we will be compliant. That's what enables you to build executive engagement, because then, of course, it becomes a no-brainer. You have to have a robust process in place. So it's not that you can't have milestones that need to be achieved, but we need to understand when a KPI, when a key performance indicator is going to be met during a piloting phase or a trial phase. There's no point, for example, trying a biological system that has a 3-month acclimatization period and expecting it to meet its treated effluent targets in that acclimatization period. Because you know it's not going to happen. You know that you need to wait 4 months, 5 months, or however long it may be for that process to reach steady state. And then, of course, the most important one is the bottom one, engaging all voices. Everyone has to be involved. We need to talk to central and field operations staff, to folks in asset management, the commercial people, customer liaison, marketing, if it's anything that consumers are going to notice. And most importantly, I think legal and procurement, so that you understand if you're going to try a technology, if you're going to pilot it and it works, is there a route to implementation that is legal? Can you get through procurement? Do you have to have a competitive process, for example? You have to adhere to the requirements of the non-technical services within the organization. So there are lots of ways we can make things like this work. Now, I say there's lots of ways. I'm going to talk about one particular approach, and it's a program that I'm delighted and proud to say I love to run, called the Trial Reservoirs Initiative. And it's a non-profit program and always has been, which now runs out of a not-for-profit foundation called Tech Ascend Foundation. What we find is that tech users in utilities are often able to try things because there are innovation divisions, there might be R&D exemptions when it comes to things like procurement. And it enables people to try things that they're interested in, but it's not very good at enabling utility staff to move those things into business as usual. Sometimes it's because the folks in the innovation division are not involved in core business at all. They might be physically in a different location. They don't have to engage themselves in routine operations. So there's this disconnect between what people at the sharp end actually need and what the innovation divisions think is interesting. So central to the way we work is to get everybody involved in the conversation before a trial takes place. We also often find that folks in the innovation divisions have their own KPIs, so their own job description objectives, that they have to try 5 new things a year, for example. But they don't have any KPIs, and nor does anybody else, about actually implementing new things if the trial shows that they're a success. So we end up in the position where we've got these weird fragmented contracts where the innovation division thinks something interesting has come across their desks. They want to try something, so they put a small contract in place for 3 months or so, or 6 months. And at the end of it, then they have the job, along with the technology developer, of going to the actual sites and telling them that there's something of great potential, but they haven't got the experience of working at the sites where the technology might be used. So they might not have asked the right questions in the sense of the trial. And the way we overcome all of this is to have one contract, which is a trial and purchase agreement, which is basically a conditional purchase agreement that says you're going to try something. If it meets the KPIs that the user sets for it, as in collectively between the operational staff and the innovation staff, and it meets all of those KPIs, then you will go ahead and implement it. Now, it takes a bit more work up front, but we use this method to achieve a 75% success rate in the trials that we run, which you compare to the 75% failure rate that we see across the board in the water industry, shows that there's something in it, there's something in this system, and this is how it works. So let me find my pointer. I'm not going to labor every point on this slide. What I want it to convey to you more than anything else is that there is a system that we follow. So it's not luck. We have an actual process, and it is a multi-stage process, but forgive the horrendogram, it's simpler in concept than it looks. So we start here at number 1, where we identify a solution. You see a solution that addresses a challenge that you've got. Let's say it's out of compliance phosphorus in treated effluent at sewage treatment works. You've seen something you think will solve your problem. The second step is that you get the trial reservoir team involved in a conversation, and we will speak to the technology vendor and say, if you're going to undertake a trial with this particular user, then we can help you. And if they sign a letter of engagement with us, it's like a letter of intent that says they will allow us to review the KPIs that they agree with you and to review the results of the trial. So you don't have to rely only on their report at the end to understand whether or not the technology actually worked. It's also a letter of intent from our side that says we will provide them with some funding to support the trial. And this is on a repayable grant basis. And I'll explain why that's important in a couple of minutes when I get to the end. We then start with the heavy lifting. So step 3 is the trial design, and this is something that we work on collectively. This is really important. All of the KPIs for the trial have to be objective. So we have critical success factors, and those are the things that you say that the user says are really important. If the technology is going to work, then these are the things it must be able to do. So it must be able to remove phosphorus from final effluent at a sewage treatment works. For example, you have more than one KPI, and you usually have KPIs for technical performance, for costs. So you'll have commercial KPIs and you'll have some service KPIs. And those are things like how onerous it is to run this particular piece of technology, what its electricity demand is, what you're going to have to spend on chemicals, that kind of thing, as well as the performance that it has to actually achieve. We work through all these together, and then at the end of it, we'll have a list of hopefully about 5 KPIs, which are the triggers to purchase or the triggers to implement for you. So if this technology can do these 5 things, then it does what you need it to do. They have to be objective. So we help break down what qualitative KPIs would look like if they were measurable. You might want something that's user-friendly because it has to fit in with the process operators or the process controllers routine. We can turn that into an objective KPI that says, it's a piece of hardware, you run it with a piece of software. Once the technology developer or the provider has given a 1-day training course or a half-day training course to the people that are going to be required to work it, then they can operate this thing, and it takes no more than 15 minutes of their week. So now we've turned something user-friendly into a measurable KPI. Once we've done that and we're all in agreement that these KPIs for the trial are the ones that actually will answer the questions that the utility or the technology user needs to ask, then we put 2 agreements in place. And one of them is the agreement between the user and the vendor. It's a simple, or it could be your normal 2-party contract. It's just between the user and the vendor, and we play no part in it. There are no 3-way agreements in this system. The other agreement is between us and the technology developer, where we say you can have a repayable grant if you need it to cover the costs of delivering the trial. We then release funds to them, and they deliver the trial for the end user. And during that time, one of our team members will remain in contact as trial monitor. We'll be in touch twice a month with each individual organization. And it just helps mediate and support the relationship, and also help troubleshoot when the trial hits obstacles, because it always does. No pilot ever goes to plan. We know that. So then we have somebody on hand to provide technical support and to help keep people on track and remind them of the original objectives that we set at the beginning. At the end of the trial, we do a post-trial evaluation. So the technology developer or the vendor produces their trial report the way they always do, and they hand it over to the customer and to us and say, this is the report. We think we've met all the KPIs, or we don't think we've met the KPIs, whatever the case may be. We will review it. And if we can see that there is sufficient evidence to support the conclusions that they've drawn, so if they say tick, 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 we've met all of the KPIs, we'll look at the results and go, yes, they provided evidence, or I don't see the evidence for this claim. So can you articulate, can you provide the evidence, or can you change the claim if there actually isn't evidence to support it? That means that you get the technology seller's report, but you also get a validation that's completely independent, because it does matter to us whether the trial has worked or not, but it would be damaging to everybody, including us, to claim that something has worked when it hasn't. The end result goes one of two ways. So either, despite everyone's best efforts, the KPIs have not been met, in which case the and purchase part of the trial and purchase agreement is irrelevant. It doesn't matter, it falls away, and there's no requirement for any user to ever procure something that doesn't do what they want. If that happens, we write off the money that we've given to the technology provider. So it becomes a grant that is not repayable, and they don't have to pay us back anything at all. If, however, it has met all of its KPIs, then you will go ahead with whatever purchase, lease, subscription, whatever it was that was acceptable to your procurement team and you put into the trial and purchase agreement. And that, of course, means that procurement happens and revenue flows from the user to the supplier, and that flow of revenue enables them to repay their grant. They put it back in the revolving pool of money, and we send it out immediately to support another trial. So it's basically we lend money to technology developers to undertake trials in the user's asset base. If it works, they repay us and we lend it out again. If it doesn't work, you don't have to buy anything and they don't have to pay us back. So our role is to de-risk this process. And it's been working. So here's a map of all the trials that have finished in the program so far. 20 trials have started, 4 of them are going on at the moment, 16 have finished, and 12 of those were successful. So you can see on the key at the top, the purple boxes refer to finished trials that were successful, and the orange boxes refer to finished trials that have not been successful. And from the map, from the key, you can see they are around the world. Some of them have been done in drinking water treatment and distribution, some of them in sewage treatment, some industrial water treatment for zero liquid discharge at pulp and paper sites, for example, and some of them relate to water for irrigation for crop production in agriculture. So 14 countries, some in the private sector, some in the public sector, all very different. The only thing they all have in common, without exception, is that they've all used the trial and purchase agreement approach. So there are consequences of success, I like to call it. If it works, you have to do something. If it doesn't work, everybody's obligations are over and nobody has to do anything. So that's kind of the easy option, but failure is not a good, easy option. So the idea is that before the trial begins, we think about if it works, what next, rather than waiting, finding out if it works, and then starting to think about what next. So this is not rocket science. It really isn't. I'm going to talk about a couple of examples now that I think will be interesting, and they're recent, so you won't have heard of these before. Certainly not last time I did a CAWASA webinar, these trials hadn't finished. The first one is a trial of a technology called Smart 360. And this is actually software. It's not a technology that's hardware that you have to build. It required no civil works. And this was done on the Pacific island of Samoa. The technology user was Samoa Water Authority, and it was a trial that ran from July 2024 to March 25, so only finished earlier this year. Smart 360 is a digital platform, and what it does is manage workflows, and the idea was to digitize some of Samoa Water Authority's core functions. So it does things, for example, like digitize meter readings, where instead of the SWA staff going out with a van and a clipboard and a pen and some paper, and then going back and having to input all of the meter readings into a spreadsheet and then generate bills. It includes a phone app that enables them to photograph people's meters, and it captures the serial number, the location of the photograph, and the reading, and it enables automatic generation of bills, which then get emailed out. And it removes days of work for the staff, and it also removes a lot of sources of errors, because between writing the number down or writing all the information down out in the field and then transcribing it into a spreadsheet when you get back. There's a lot of opportunities for error. It's done other things as well. It manages the workflow of responding to customer complaints or reports of leaks, for example, and it's provided them with the ability to work in a much more efficient manner. It's mobile, it works in the cloud, but you don't need constant internet access for it to work. So it's a really nice platform that's designed for smaller, less rich and more remote utilities, which is what attracted Samoa Water to it. The technology itself
Oh, you muted, Dr. Burgess. You muted yourself.
my internet connection dropped. I really
Oh,
apologize.
sorry. Okay. I thought it was that you're muted. Okay, that's fine.
No. Where did you lose me? I was mid-flow then.
Yeah, you could just take back, I think you were saying where it was useful for because of the remote spaces.
Yes, okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, Samoa Water Authority's area of service provision is two main islands and then some smaller islands. The two main islands are Upalu and Savai. And Smart 360 was implemented on the large islands first, so 35,000 customers or 35,000 household meters, and is now being, since the trial finished, is now being rolled out to the smaller islands. There's a lot of photometer reading capabilities. The service order and the work order management modules enable them to streamline the reporting of customer complaints and when they're responded to. And one of the things they're particularly pleased with is that they have a customer charter that says they'll resolve customer complaints or at least respond to them if they can't resolve them within 5 working days. And those are the things that attracted SWA the most were the cost savings, the added efficiencies and the not elimination, but minimization of data errors and the ability to meet their customer charter. And the outcome of this trial, so it was a 10-month trial, was that they digitized their processes, they digitized the documentation. They've now trained the whole of their operational staff to use the Smart 360 platform. Binary have been really good, the technology providers, and they've gone above and beyond actually and been quite willing to tailor the interface of the app and the app itself and the way it works to adjust to the way that the SWA staff were used to working. They used to have DAFRON. So there were some processes and menus that they were used to that they wanted brought across into the new platform, and Binary were happy to do that. And what they've found is that they've got better customer service, prompt billing. People are now paying their water bills on time, so their revenue collection has increased about 45%, and they are able to save a lot of money on repeat trips to verify meter readings and also to plan work routes much better for leak detection and repair teams, for example, to go out because transport has to be done between the islands. There's quite a nice interview with the technology provider, which is available on YouTube, I think. I can't actually remember, but this QR code will take you there if you want to watch a video of the Binary guys talking to somebody from the Reservoir team about this. And if Ignatius, I will rely on your judgment, but if you would like these slides as a PDF for everybody so that folks can use the QR code later, then I'm quite happy to share the slides.
Sure, please.
Terrific. The next example isn't an island. It is Steampunk 40, and it's a very different technology. This was implemented at quite a small agricultural center owned by a company called Silal, and it's in Abu Dhabi. So Silal are trying to generate food in the desert. Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates is very much constrained in its crop production and food security by a lack of access to fresh water for crop irrigation, and also by a lack of access to water for greenhouse cooling. Because it's a desert situation, all of the crops are produced in greenhouses, and 75% of the water that they need for agricultural activity in the UAE is used to cool the greenhouses. It's not used to irrigate the crops. This particular technology is called Steampunk 40, and it's a carbon positive desalination system which provides sufficient water for cooling and for crop production, even in a desert. So the drivers for Silal are food source diversification and increase of food security in the UAE. They don't want to import food. It's expensive and it's difficult, and the food has to cover long distances in hot climates. The UAE groundwater is too saline for agricultural use without treatment, and they didn't want to use reverse osmosis because, I mean, it demands a huge amount of energy and it produces some very difficult to deal with brine, admittedly a low volume, pardon me, but difficult to handle and dispose of. They also have a net zero carbon goal, so they wanted to decouple their agriculture from the utilization of fossil fuels, where they've been using diesel generators, for example, to run desalination plants. And this is the thing that they've tried. This is called Steampunk 40 or SP40. It's an integrated system that produces high quality drinking quality water, but it's remineralized and it runs solely on solar energy. The producer or the provider of this technology is called Desalinator, and they have their own patented photovoltaic thermal panels. So this is different from normal photovoltaic panels. They capture electrical and thermal energy, and that means that they convert 60% of incoming solar radiation into energy instead of about 15%, which is what's standard for normal photovoltaic panels. Because of the way they operate their desalination system, it's a 95% lower chemical demand for the water treatment process and a much lower carbon footprint because they don't use a membrane, so they're not trying to shovel the water through an RO membrane at all. The KPIs are quite straightforward for this one. Silal needed a particular water output of 25 cubic meters per day from the pilot size plant. They needed a water quality, a TDS below 0.93 milligrams per litre. They needed a particular power and a power production. They wanted 130 kilowatt hours and grid consumption. So this is a grid tied plant. It doesn't have to be, as it turned out, but they wanted a grid consumption of 0.6 kilowatts or lower, and they needed a particular carbon dioxide equivalent saving, and that was 38 tons of CO2 savings. The result was that this worked. So this was quite a long trial, and it included constructing one module of a modular system to show that it could work. The post-trial commitment from Silal was if it worked, they would take ownership of that one module, and their aspiration over the next few years is to roll this technology out to other farms that they own and increase the footprint or the capacity of the one at the site where they did the trial. So with a post-trial commitment, their trial and purchase agreement said that they would try one unit, and if it worked, they would procure it. What they plan to do is to roll this out to 5 other farms and to have 3 more modules of the same system at the site they started with. But that doesn't need to be their post-trial commitment. We don't ask in the post-trial or in the trial and purchase agreement for that commitment to be the full-on deployment at full scale across all sites. There's no need for that. All we need to see is that the next step will be taken at the end of the trial if it works. And the same kind of thing, there is a video clip about this trial available. And again, you can use the QR code at your leisure. Now, I said on the map that the purple blocks indicate trials which were undertaken, have finished, were successful, and the technology's gone on to be implemented by the organization, by the utility or the tech seeker that used it. But what about the orange ones? What about the ones that didn't work? Here we actually learned quite a lot more. So sometimes we win and sometimes we learn. Sometimes it was because the situation isn't as the end user, as the technology seeker thought. So one example of this is that the IVATS trial was a self-powered smart water metering device. And the idea was that it has a micro hydroflow turbine that's built into the cartridge. It sits in the network, and the flow of water through the network spins the turbine and powers the unit. The end user thought they had 18 to 20 litres per minute flow in the pipes, and that was sufficient to power the unit. But when we dropped the devices into the network, what we found was that the flow was actually about 4 litres per minute at most, and it was too slow. The turbine didn't move quickly enough to power the unit. The lesson we learned from that one is that if we are expecting a particular set of working conditions, and some of those conditions are critical to whether or not the technology will succeed, we have to go and actually check that the working conditions are the way we think they are. In this case, it was because of population redistribution, where the units were being deployed actually in an island, a Spanish island, and the majority of young people had left the island and moved to the Spanish mainland, and therefore the flow of water or the demand for drinking water wasn't as high as it had been last time the asset owner checked. So we learned that if you're going to try something in a working environment, you need to know for sure what those conditions are, and information must be up to date. Sometimes the trials have failed because the tech developer hasn't responded in a mature fashion to things that go wrong. So in one of the trials, we needed a routine supply of good quality enzyme with a particular level of activity to catalyze a reaction. And what we found when we tried to scale this trial up from a small pilot scale, I think it was a 50 litre, no, it wasn't, it was a 500 litre size to 5 cubic meters, was that we couldn't buy enough enzyme because the supply chain of it wasn't mature enough to provide enough quality and enough quantity of enzyme on a routine basis. When the producer tried to accelerate production and generate sufficient volume of enzyme to run the scaled up process, the quality decreased. So it wasn't the technology developer's fault directly, but instead of either supporting the enzyme provider to improve their quality and quantity at the same time, or trying to engage with alternatives to diversify their sources, they tried to scale back the trial. And that was the wrong approach. So what we've learned from this one is that we have to be much more active when we manage trials when it comes to obstacles. And even in this case, where the end user and the tech provider between them said, yes, all right, this is going to be an issue, so we'll just make the trial smaller, it's not always the best way, even if it's something that they've agreed upon. Because what it meant in this case was that the technology user didn't have a process in place in ready for compliance deadline. They needed to meet a particular wastewater treatment quality target by the end of the last calendar year, and scaling down the trial meant they weren't able to do that. So they had to try a different technology instead. At no time have any of the 4 trials that didn't work, none of them worked because of the technology itself. It was either poor communication or a mismatch between what we thought the technology was going to be required to cope with and what it was actually required to cope with. So we've learnt a huge amount, and we haven't had any recent failures. I'm going to touch wood now because famous last words. Our approach then is always evolving. Whenever we learn something, we carry that lesson through into future trials. At the moment, we have this 75% success rate, which is triple the water industry average. We must be doing something right. So my call to action is either join us or copy us. I'm going to spend the last 2 minutes, if I may, on a completely shameless plug for something different. And it's a series of podcasts called the Executive Exchange. They are 15 minutes at most, and we have a series in which leading executives from the global water sector share personal stories and first-hand insights from things that they've gone through. So we've had, for example, the executive director from City of Cape Town talked about how they dealt with day zero or the impending day zero that they just managed to avert, what they put in place, how they did it, which of those things worked, which ones didn't, and those kinds of things. We've talked to cities in war zones about how they managed to continue to keep water coming out of the taps even during the conflict in their zone. So there's lots of different episodes. All of them are available. They're all free to listen to. So if you have a commute and you have to drive or you use public transport to get from A to B and you've got 10 minutes to spare, these can be really good ones. So I would encourage you to listen to the Executive Exchange if you're ever feeling like watching something better from social media than just TikTok. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much. That sounds like I think I'm going to be looking out for the Exec Exchange. I think it's a great idea for the podcast, and I'm sure our participants will be looking out for that as well. But I think that was a really excellent presentation. I wish that if I were in a position to influence some of our decision makers, I think certainly I'm going to share this presentation, which we are recording with many of them. I think they are very useful lessons as we go forward. Only that I don't, well, at least you brought this side, the sort of scale that we operate at with the example of Samoa, because many of our utilities are pretty small utilities, on the 50,000 customers. And I think some of what the example of the Samoa, I think is a nice case scenario of, the trial and purchase agreement, trial
And if
reservoir.
anybody wants more, sorry.
No, you go ahead. Sorry.
If anybody wants more detail, if you have questions, even after this, if you reflect on the handout later and you want to find out more, I am very, very open to having conversations or replying to emails or whatever you
Okay,
need.
right. Thank you. So I'll open the floor now to our participants, should they have any questions or
Jo, when
comments.
we talked one time, you had mentioned you might be doing something in Montserrat. Did that come about?
Yes, we are partway through that project. We went to Montserrat on a voluntary basis and assessed. We did a bit of an audit of the sites that they have there. 12 particular sites, mixture of wastewater treatment and water treatment sites, needed urgent refurbishment and then some longer term rebuilding. And we pulled together a plan of what would be needed at each of those sites, in which the short term emergency response was also the first steps of the longer term plan, and presented that plan to the British government, because Montserrat, as most people know,
Yeah.
is a British overseas territory. And that released £7 million of government funding for Montserrat to upgrade what they were doing. So that's the work that we're engaged in now, is spending that money wisely to do the short-term upgrades on the first most urgent sites. They are in a position that lots of utilities are in, actually, all over the world, where they have equipment that had a 20-year lifespan that's still being coaxed along by some incredibly skilled operators, getting 28, 29, 30 years of life out of this equipment, but it really does need to be refurbished and replaced. So a lot of the work we're doing now is really upgrading of standard equipment. Is not particularly innovative, but it is going to provide safe water coming out of the taps. And it is providing sewage treatment to a secondary, or in one case, tertiary level, so that it can be discharged to the environment safely. Um, so it's not particularly innovative, but it is incredibly satisfying to do.
Right.
Okay.
Did you have a question, Mr. Blackman? I
No, it's just scratching my face. But I did want to say good presentation, Joe. Looking forward to seeing if we can partner on a, myself being on the vendor side of a reservoir program. So looking forward to it.
Me too.
Yes, good day, all. I have a question.
Yes, go ahead, Ezekiel.
Yes. With your Smart 360 digital software, have you ever thought of investing in a smart meter to go with this? So instead of you would like physically taking a photo of the meters, you do like a drive-by and pick up all the readings on the meters?
Yes, that is possible. So the technology company is Binary, and they are an Indian company, and they're in Pune in India. They have a range of different levels of digitizedness, I guess, of the Smart 360 platform. But the utilities that they like to work with tend not to be, the city of New York, hundreds of thousands of customers. They like to work with small and medium-sized utilities, and it enables them to take a bit more care about tailoring their offering to each individual user. So if that's something that you want, then they can do that. They have handheld devices and smart meters that use near-field communication so that you can drive by in exactly the way you say. They also have some other devices which are intended for people to collect meter readings on foot in very high density areas like peri-urban settlements or in around Indian cities where it's informal housing and it's very tightly packed. And there they have a different approach because you'd be within range of tens of meters every couple of meters with an ER that you walked. That's a long way round of saying yes, that can be done.
Okay, thank you. Now, I have another question about your trials.
Yes.
Okay, who actually determines that the trial is successful or not? Is it like the vendor, or do you have a team that would go and back up that?
No, it's not the vendor. It's not the vendor alone. We ask the vendor to report on the measurements that they've taken, but in many cases, the user is also responsible for generating some of the data. So if, for example, the user has a discharge and discharge to the environment compliance that they have to adhere to, and they are doing their own laboratory analysis of samples, then they will still be the ones taking samples of the, the treated effluent and taking them to the laboratory and generating their own data. There are also things that only they can measure. So if we want to know whether a particular piece of equipment is difficult to operate or it only takes 5 minutes to do what the technology vendor says is a 5-minute job, then we need their operators to report back on whether or not that's actually the case or whether something is incredibly difficult to live with and impossible to operate. Then we need to know how much of their time it's consumed. That data that the user generates are shared with the vendor, and the data that the technology vendor generate are shared with the user, and both sides share the information with us. So whether or not the trial has been a success is something that we reach consensus on at the end. We actually look at the results, see whether or not the performance target. Sorry, my internet is awful today. We look at it collectively to see whether or not the performance metrics have been achieved, whether the user friendliness of metrics have been achieved, and whether the commercial metrics have been achieved. And once we've reached consensus, then we will say either yes, it's worked, the KPIs have been met, or no, it hasn't. And that either triggers that the user will go ahead and utilize the technology, or obviously they're not going to utilize it. Who's going to use a new technology that doesn't do what they need it to do? And that determines whether or not the technology developer has to put the grant back into the reservoir for us to lend out again or not.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you for your contribution, Ezekiel. I think during the CWWA conference, the exhibition, I think I saw one of the suppliers of smart meters. I think what he presented was one, well, what I observed there was one of them where there was a I think some form of a chip for the old analog type meters, which would send a signal back. It would have taken the photo of the meter, I think something similar to what you're doing, and relay it back to base. So yeah, instead of having to replace the whole metering system, but it was pretty interesting. Yeah, we have a question from Mr. Stefan Tyndall, our man up in Provo Water. Please.
Hi, Ms. Burgess. Dr. Burgess, I was just wondering, do you have an in-depth case study on the project that was done in I think is UAE with the solar power desalination?
Yes, I can send you a link to it, and we can talk through any detail that you want over and above the case study that's been published as well.
Okay, thank you.
Let me see if I can find the link. And
Any others?
you'll have my email address on the handout actually as well.
All right. Yeah, so you could always share this with me, and I will circulate to the
Brilliant.
team. Yeah. Well, thanks again. I think it has taken us to end of time.
Ignatius, if I can just
Oh yes, go
run
ahead,
into
Val,
intercession,
please.
is that this is a remarkably useful tool and service that Jo provides and her organization provides. And I would really like to see, Caribbean utilities thinking about what innovations they want. I mean, Jo has talked about 2 case studies today. She has loads of case studies. So you can see other things. But the thing is to think about what innovation you might consider, but a little leery about saying, well, we don't want to be an early adopter. Where could Jo's organization help you? And so take it not just about, oh, this is another webinar, that's nice, but really think about how we could use this in our utility. What are we looking at? Where could we use help in testing an innovation that we're thinking about? So I really encourage you to utilize and get in touch with Jo on anything that you're thinking about. No guarantees that it will be taken, but this is something that I have been watching for quite a while now, since they started. And I'll also put I do listen to the 15-minute podcasts every week, Jo. They're great. As well as the Water Network. That's my favorite podcast. Is a 30-minute one once a month. This is really fantastic. Always one of the best podcasts around. So some really innovative things that you're doing, and thank you for all that you do. Thanks, Ignatius.
Yeah, thank you. Dr. Burgess, perhaps I may have to follow up with you in a bilateral so I can see how best to have such an engagement, perhaps at a higher level with the decision makers in the utilities.
Happy to.
May we perhaps have a special session for those senior management to just get to know some of what the services that you offer and some of the innovations that you have reviewed and the cases that similar to what you have presented. But I think that would be a useful sort of engagement. So I'll follow up with a bilateral on that by email. And would like to again thank Valerie for finding you for us. And thank you especially for taking time off your busy schedule to join us at, I don't know what time zone that you're in now, but thanks a lot for making that possible.
Thank you.
And to all of you, I doubt we will meet in this forum before the festive season. So I'd like to wish you all the very best. And I know some of you will be celebrating Thanksgiving shortly and Christmas thereafter. And so hopefully we should see again in the new year. So all the best to all of you. I'm Ignatius Jean, the Executive Director at CAWASA, signing off and wishing you a good rest of the evening and the rest of the year. Take care of yourselves. Bye.
Thanks. Happy Christmas, everybody.
All right, take care, guys.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Jo.